Hi, and welcome to One Trick Luxem. Today we're going to go over early meta results with the Distorted Reflections meta for the Serene Fire Luxem Zander list. So a little bit of background. Serene Fire Luxem has been around ever since even the ALC Alchemical Revolution format. It's been in and out of the meta, and it feels particularly strong right now, specifically because of the Ryle package, the one that everyone's running with Liminal Guide, with Undying Dreams, and a couple of copies of potentially other cards as well. So looking into the beginning of the meta, where everyone's still figuring out, okay, what is the meta? How aggressive are the fire decks going to be? What are the counters to it? Is Censor good enough? Are there any really interesting play lines like Expeditious Opening into Snow White, things to shut down both aggressive level 1 fire decks, which have a lot of power now, and also the level 3 fire turbo decks. And right now, Luxem, I feel, is strong in the meta mostly because everyone's still trying to figure it out, while the Luxem players already kind of had a solidified list from metas back. So right now, what we're seeing is an influx of really strong Luxem results. And as you can see here, I have pulled quite a few lists from Fractal of Insight. We've started seeing results from the very first few events, starting from August 7th all the way to now. Today is August 17th. And recently we've seen quite a few strong records here. We can see Noel having a 501 record at a 45 entrant DTR winner case. We see DennisYao having a 511 record at 72 entrants at the DTR Online Regional, and even at the larger events, the KL Regionals at nearly 250 entrants, Fire Luxem Zander at 611, and also the Scry Games Regional with 111 entrants at 502. So what we want to talk about today is specific deck building choices that some of these players have made that I find really, really interesting. Now, Fire Luxem Zander is by no means a new deck. It's been around for a long time, and everyone kind of has their own opinion on how to pilot it, how to build it, but I find that these particular deck building decisions very, very interesting. So let's take a quick look. What I've done here is I've kind of laid all of their deck choices side by side, and you can see that some of these choices, like, they'll never change. Like, we're always going to be running 4 Lightweaver's Assaults, we're always going to be running 4 Luxem Sight, at least in this Turbo 3 build, unless you're in Wind for a mid-range build, and we're always going to be running, like, things such as Striking Illuminance to end the game, but what you'll notice is some players are opting for varying copies of different cards and packages. What's really cool about Luxem is that the engine of the Luxem package, when you say Dungeon Guide, Creative Shock, Ryle, Float, that adds up to maybe 20 to 24 slots in a deck. The Luxem package typically is 18 to 20, sometimes even 22, rarely, in a deck. And then lastly, like tech slots, you have like 6 to 10 slots. So the entire deck is extremely compressed. Every single card is competing with every other card. So when someone decides to say, hey, I want to make room for this particular tech choice, they've decided to cut something. Usually something integral that other players may decide, hey, no, we're never cutting that. So I'm going to want to go through what are some of the weird choices, what are some of the proactive decisions that some really skilled players have made this season to counteract the beginning of the format. Let's take a quick look. Let's take a look at how I've set this up. So I currently have the 5 top Serene Fire Luxem Zander lists from the past 2 weeks, from August 9th to yesterday, August 16th, with varying records. You can see in green all of the cards that are basically shared between all of these decks. So things like 4 Creative Shock, for 3 to 4 Incapacitate, Liminal Guides, Luxem Sight, Planet Explosives. These we don't have to talk about because basically every list is running some amount of them. Some individuals have chosen to change the ratios, and I've bolded these changes in 3 Fast Cure, 3 Excalibur instead of 2, 3 Striking Illuminance instead of 2, 1 Thieving Cut versus 2 Thieving Cut, one planet explosives versus two planet explosives, so on and so forth. You can take a look at it below if you'd like, but I want to draw our attention to the changes in color. So for example, the Scry the Skies, the Reduce to Ash, and more specifically, the cards in the material deck that I want to talk about today. So, starting from August 9th, we have the deck list from Noel, where the two main material deck choices that they chose to use were Luxor's Map and Nullifying Lantern. What I've noticed across these lists is either you're a Luxem Map believer, Luxor's Map believer, you love having the consistency of being able to glimpse away all your yellow cards and protect them late game when you bring out the Luxor's Map, make sure you don't get factorized, pop it off, get your Lightweaver's Assault, and go from there. Having that knowledge is very, very crucial and important in an open meta. But we also have two players who chose not to use Luxor's Map in DennisYao and ZDevX. Apologies if I've mispronounced your names. So, I typically see Luxor's Map starting to get cut when the meta gets really, really fast. And it can be argued that right now we're in a decently fast meta. We have to deal with fellow Turbo to 3 Ryle decks. We also have to deal with a lot of fire aggro lists. The KFC list, the Gworja, Swing with the Suzaku, Peppered Chef, Sacrifice the Suzaku, Swing for 4, bring it back, Swing for 4 again. We have to deal with a lot of aggression. And so I feel some people are cutting the Luxor's Map. I'm not comfortable enough to do so at this point in time. I might not have the skill, to be very honest with you, to be able to say, you know what, I can afford to just leave a Luxem site and a Lightweaver's Assault in my hand and play the game with it and then not risk drawing into too many Luxem cards. No, I rely on Luxor's Map a lot, and then I'm happy to hear that at least 3 individuals agree with me here to keep Luxor's Map in their main material deck. But keep in mind that's also an option you can take out of your material deck if you'd like to sideboard in more hate against the decks that you're struggling with. Noel here also chose to use Nullifying Lantern when we're up against something like Suzaku, and even when we're up against things like Genbu. Like, Nullifying Lantern is amazing against anything that requires Fire Engrave, against anything that requires Water Engrave. We typically see Nullifying Lantern paired with something like Quicksilver Grail. Again, we're not seeing Quicksilver Grail right now because I feel the meta's not solidified enough for us to make the call and say, you know what, the best deck in format, they're all relying on the grave, they're all wanting to resolve things that require Fire Engrave, so we're going to run a Quicksilver Grail and tuck in the Nullifying Lantern underneath it. We're not quite at that stage yet. We might be eventually, but at this stage it's still quite an open meta, so I agree. Grand Crusader's Ring, all across the board, very strong. Nullifying Lantern, if you see the meta call, or if your locals has a lot of like Rending Flames players, Kindle Fire players, March Hares, things like that. If you have a lot of Genbu players at your locals, Nullifying Lantern is a really good one to bring in main board, or at least sideboard. So, very standard list in my opinion. Very strong. Apologies. So what's interesting here is that Noel decided to keep 3 Scry the Skies. Now, I find this to be a really, really cool choice because Scry the Skies has been in the list ever since Alchemical Revolution. It has sometimes come in and come out in terms of numbers, but it's almost always been there. What's interesting to see now is that as all of these other players are choosing to cut other engine pieces, they're choosing to cut even things like Thieving Cut, they're choosing to cut numbers of Juggle Knives, Noel here is choosing to keep Scry the Skies. Now, I really like Scry the Skies because you can use it early game. If, say for example, someone uses Censor and completely blocks you out of using Liminal Guides and whatnot, you can potentially Scry the Skies, put down a useless card in the matchup, look at the top of your deck, potentially, put it into your memory. If it's good, if it's a dungeon guide, cool, you can recollect, you can take it back in your hand. If it's also a bad card, well, good news. You just put a bad card into your memory that you can banish away next turn to go to level 2. So, Scry the Skies kind of smooths out your early game, but what I'm noticing here is, 4 other individuals are not running Squad Disguise, and they're choosing to increase their assassin package here. They're choosing to increase their numbers of planted explosives, for example. They're choosing to go to maybe 4 juggle knives instead of 3. They're choosing to maybe go to 4 fast cure instead of 3. And I feel like this ratio makes it very easy for Noel to just simply say, hey, I don't need the Squad Disguise in this matchup. I'm going to put in something along the lines of Reduce to Ash or Vanish from Sight. Vanish from Sight, amazing against ally decks. So I feel like this is a very strong standard main board that you can say, hey, you know what? Squad Disguise is never terrible against a matchup. I can always side it out. I can always put in something that's amazing against that matchup and absolutely annihilate games 2 and 3. So I do like Squad Disguise here, but I do feel like as a deck builder, we're really crunched for space. And sometimes I feel like I might want to see the more consistent numbers of 4 juggle knives. Maybe I want to see another fast cure to bump up my floating memory ratio. I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but we'll continue on and see what others are playing with as of now. But Noel, very strong deck, very good call, Nullifying Lantern, Luxurious Map, as represented by their 501 record. Let's look at their sideboard. One Art of War is very interesting. There's a list I failed to showcase here. Le Seraphim, they are running a really, really cool list that is running 4 Enchanted Fate, Fate? I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but essentially it's a fast speed spell that heals 3. It is kind of like the opposite of Juggle Knives, in the sense that Juggle Knives is a 2-cost fast speed action that says, hey, your opponent will take 1 damage and I'll draw a card. Enchanted Fate says, hey, you know what? I will draw a card and I'll heal 3. So it's kind of like the defensive version of Juggle Knives. I feel like we've moved away a little bit in terms of deck building choices towards Juggle Knives here because it's an assassin action, but I really, really like this idea that we could potentially hold up influence and start healing. It's really good against aggro, and I really like that they've built their deck around this in the sense that, you know what, I'm just going to play some copies of Fleeting Guard, kind of like a Veiling Breeze. I'll play some copies of Undying Wraith Guard, and then if you're an aggro deck, good luck punching through all of my taunts, punching through all of my like my fogs, and then trying to get through my health, which is constantly being healed by Enchanting Fate. I think this is a really cool deck list, but it does lose the consistency of not being an assassin skill, which we do have a lot of in these later deck lists coming up. We see a lot of Incapacitates, we see a lot of Juggle Knives, and I feel like those numbers are going up and up, mostly for consistency reasons, but we might have to see how good Fire Aggro is in the meta. Alright, enough rambling about that. Crystallized Destiny, not much to say about this here. It's seen in every single sideboard across the board. It's like our best option ever since Slimes decimated us when they came out. We had no ways to interact with Storm Slime. They go Storm Slime for 10, Storm Slime for 10, and we go, well, we can't incap that, so I guess we die now. Well, we can interact now. We have Crystallized Destiny, but it's still not the best defensive skill because right now Diana players and a lot of other players as well have fast speed damage effects. So what can happen is in response to their kill attempt, you say Crystallized Destiny, and then they'll say, okay, it resolves. I'm just going to ping you for 1 damage or 2 damage, I'll break the shield, and I'll still kill you. So even if you have Crystallized Destiny in your sideboard, you still have to hold up interaction, you still have to have Incapacitate, and you're still not out of the picture yet. What's interesting here is we have one defensive option against what I like to call spell big boom kind of effects, like a Rai throwing a bunch of like arcane blasts at you, or someone just dealing a whole bunch of damage during 1 turn. I'm thinking like Jin. Crystallized Destiny stops a lot of that, but Art of War is being seen in a lot of sideboards here, and that helps immensely against ally lists. So my locals, I go to locals between 2 cities. A lot of individuals here love to play allies, and I've basically done really well putting Out of War either in my sideboard or my main board. I've gone 3 over 2 of them, and I topped all 3 of them in first place. It's just the meta. It's just Luxem's really well positioned at the moment, but Out of War had a really, really good part in playing in that, because against something like Wind Allies, if you clear their board, they can still come back just by playing like a Shimmercloak Assassin. They'll hit you, they'll crack a power cell, they'll rally the Vans, they'll hit you again, and then suddenly you take a lot of combo damage and you die. But with Out of War out, you stop yourself from getting comboed off by a lot of these ally lists, so I really like this as an option. So you'll see I put Out of War and Crystallized Destiny both in green in these sideboard options. You'll notice that Noel here is using Excalibur, 1 Fast Cure, and I really like these numbers because you also notice that with the 3 Scry the Skies, it means that it does not matter what the matchup is. I can take a weaker card out, and I can put in something that's going to be better, for sure. Like, for example, if Resolute Stand is not useful against a particular matchup, I can say, okay, I'm going to put in 1 Excalibur, 1 Fast Cure, maybe Crystallized Destiny if it's the right matchup, maybe Regal Inquisition if it's the right matchup. Okay, what if I'm against allies and I know that they don't have anything I want to incap? Maybe I'll reduce copies of incap and I'll put in Vanish from Sight instead. But wait, what if they have something I do want to incap, but I don't want to hold 4 copies of incap for? Well, you know what? I could just do like 3 copies of incap, 1 Excalibur, or 2 copies of incap, 1 Excalibur, 1 Fast Cure. What's really cool about this sideboard is you can mix and match and decide what your ratios are on the fly. And I really like this kind of sideboard because by having 1-ofs in Excalibur and Fast Cure, it makes you very flexible no matter what the matchup is. And we'll get a little bit more into sideboard theory down the line, but this is one way you could approach your sideboard that I really, really respect and I really, really like. Not much to say about the 3 Vanish from Sight. It just makes sense. You take out Incapacitate, you take out something like Scry the Skies, you take out something that's not maybe as impactful against allies, you bring in Vanish from Sight. Now you're running 7 Vogs with 3 Vanish and 4 Resolutes, and you're going to be sitting pretty against those matchups. Regal Inquisition is one of my favorite cards in the new set. It basically says, I'm going to go for the kill. Do you have a way to stop me? Let's find out. Oh, you do have a way to stop me? Okay, I'll take it away from you. So your opponent's best response to your Regal Inquisition is to negate the Regal Inquisition. But if they negate the Regal Inquisition, they can't negate your win con. So Regal Inquisition is really, really good against control matchups, but I haven't had enough experience in this meta yet to kind of feel how good Regal Inquisition is yet. So I don't have a strong opinion on it, but it is definitely a card that I would love to see against any slower matchup. So we have our ally hate in Vanish from Sight, we have our control matchup hate, and we have our big boom combo hate. Again, Art of War and Vanish from Sight kind of work together against allies. We have our pick and choose Excalibur and Fast Cure. And lastly, we have Reduced to Ash. Now, I actually, in my first deck list in this format, I actually mainboarded 2 Reduced to Ash and 1 Verrucan Acolyte because I was really worried about players just actively siding in Censor against us and hating on Ryle and Liminal. And I want to say, you know what? What I can do is in that scenario, I'll just play Backup Charger. I will just draw into memory, I'll play an influence game, and eventually, with all my draw power, I will draw into a Reduced to Ash, and I will break your Censor, and I'll get all of the benefits of going to level 3 and getting my Liminals out, and I'll pivot and turn the tables at that point. What ended up happening in practice is that Reduced to Ash, I felt, hasn't really been that great, just because when I do see it, maybe I don't need it. And even if I did need to use it, I have spent 1 card, I have spent like my tempo in order to break their Censor, and then I am able to play the game again, but I could have done that already. I could have just played around the Censor in the first place. I could have just juggle knives to 2, search for Dungeon Guide and go to 3 and just start playing the game again and ignore the fact that I have Liminals and Floating Grave. It's not terrible to play around Censor, so I actually understand why we would have Reduced to Ash in the sideboard and not the main board. If Noel's list was the cookie cutter, very strong against every potential matchup, very good to go into anything kind of deck list, then the following three deck lists kind of have a more rigid direction and more of a, okay, I know kind of what I want to do kind of feel to them. In the sense that we're no longer running three Stratus guys and we're actually filling them with specific deck choices. Now, this individual, DennisYao here, has a deck list where I feel like they're making some really interesting choices that I really like in terms of influence gain and in terms of dealing with expected hate, but that I personally might not be as comfortable with. One of my favorite players, Bob, he is the best Fire Serene Luxem player as represented. He's one of the only players to bring it to Worlds last year, and he, at times, when the meta's too fast, he would make the choice and say, you know what, no Luxurious map, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play something like Blinding Orb instead, where I can not only convert my float into an actual draw, but I can also do it on a crucial turn where putting my opponent's hands down allows me to go off unimpeded. So DennisYao here is making that choice early in the meta. They've cut Luxera's map, and they've put in Blinding Orb instead. They're choosing to use Portentous Tengu here. Tengu is seen across the board for the next three deck lists, both in the DTR Online Regionals as well as the KL Regionals. And we're choosing not to run Nullifying Lantern in the main for these two deck lists for Jace the Grey and DennisYao. I feel like Nullifying Lantern or Portentous Tengu just depends on your meta call and what you want to see game one. Nullifying Lantern and Portentous Tengu are both excellent cards to have access to, but I actually found a lot of case scenarios where Portentous Tengu actually does save me games. Like after I get pressured enough where I have to take an off turn to backup charger, I might have to take another off turn down the line if they're taxing me out. I've had games where I've had Nia called naming Zander 2 where I can't really level up properly, where I've been snow whited, where I've been basically stunned for a turn where I can't really level up the way I want to. And if I don't have an option like Tengu on top of backup charger, I might be forced to materialize something along the lines of a Safeguard Amulet or a Tariff Ring at a time when I don't really want to do so, when I just really want to draw more, see more dungeon guides, and see more options. So I actually really like having Portentous Tengu here. But note as well that now we have Orb, we have Chalice of Blood, we have Portentous Tengu, and we have backup charger. We have 4 different ways to draw on top of like Grand Crusader's Ring. So basically you're going to be able to draw a card almost every turn depending on the situation, on top of being able to just level. So DennisYao's list here is kind of like, hey, I want to draw into my options, and my main deck is actually going to compensate for some of the options, some of the tech options that I'm missing in the material deck. So this individual is saying, hey, in the main deck, I am now going to run Reduce to Ash. And this pairs really well with their decision to run 2 Evercurrent Raider. This is the Water Spectre floating memory that you basically can't play unless you use Ral the Abyss and you discard it and you banish it for floating memory costs. I started off this format playing 4 copies of Evercurrent Raider. It actually didn't feel terrible. It didn't brick for me, but I was lucky. I can see a world where 0 copies to 2 copies of Evercurrent Raider is probably correct. I really like having 2 copies here. It does mean that we have a lot more floating memory than usual. We have 2 copies of Evercurrent Raider, we have 4 copies of Fast Cure, and of course we have 4 copies of Undying Dream, so we are actually on 10 floating memory compared to everyone else's 8 floating memory. What this means is that when you resolve my apologies. When you resolve Creative Shock, when you resolve Rile the Abyss, you have a really good chance of being able to pair it and discard an actual float to get a lot of advantage. I feel like this is just a high influence, high octane advantage list, and this individual says, look, I'm going to draw way more cards than you, I'm going to see more cards in my deck than you, I'm going to see all my options, I'm going to level to 3, I'm going to have a billion influence, I'm going to win. And that's kind of the direction that they're going with their deck list, and I really respect that. The weakness of that list is, hey, if I get censored, what do I do? Like, if I'm dedicating an entire deck slot to Evercurrent Raider, and then someone puts a wall in front of me and says, you can't do that anymore, what am I going to do? Well, they have a main deck answer in Reduce to Ash, because now they can say, aha, if you decide to censor me, I'm going to start drawing even more, and I'm just going to not level up, or at least I'm going to save the level 3 so that I can actually reduce to Ash on your end step, level up on my turn, and then be able to pop off with all my liminal guides, with all of my floating memory if possible, assuming you haven't already raccooned them to oblivion. So this is a very different way of playing the game compared to potentially Noel's list, where it's a little bit more flexible. I like to call like the Scry the Skies line like flexible. It like kind of like eases you through the early game sometimes. It takes bad hands away from you. This particular list by DennisYao is a little bit more variable. It has higher highs but potentially lower lows. But you also have ways to combat the situations where you're not going to see very good hands. You can say, okay, I'm not doing a very good start. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to back up Charger. I'm going to Tongu. I'm going to reduce to Ash when I find it. And from there, I'm going to turn the corner and make the game mine from that point on. So again, a really interesting deck list, and for those of you who really like drawing cards, I think this is potentially the way to go, although I do feel like not having Lux map makes me feel a little bit antsy, but if that's your direction and you're comfortable with it, power to you, my friend. Going to the sideboard, so this individual is not running the Art of War, and they're only running one Crystallized Destiny, but what's really cool here that no one else is doing, they're running 2 Heavenly Guide. They're saying, hey, in the matchup where I want to race, I'm going to race even harder than you. If you want to beat my Ryle with your Ryle, not only am I going to let you Dungeon Guide first, I'm going to Heavenly Guide. So I'm going to +3 card advantage over you. I love this approach. He says, or they say, in response to your Tristan, in response to your Merlin, I'm just going to go to Zander, but I'm going to have 3 cards over you when I resolve Heavenly Guide. This is highly focused hate towards what they would probably expect to be a level 3 meta, which I think is a pretty good call here. But they've also lost a lot of power for the allies. They don't have the Art of War, they only have 2 Vanish from Sight rather than 3. So they are saying, I'm going to see more of a level 3 call. I'm going to beat them to the punch. I'm going to have more influence than them. I'm going to kill them before they kill me. And I kind of like that approach because at the beginning of the format, I was very worried about Regal Inquisition against Zander in general, because the idea here is if you are a level 3 deck and you resolve a Regal Inquisition against Luxem Zander and they do not stop you from doing so, you basically win on the spot. Because you could just rip their entire hand apart, you take all their yellow cards, and they basically are crippled for the rest of the game, unless they are very lucky to draw into more copies of Lightweaver's Assaults. Like, you almost guarantee a victory if you can hit the right targets. But when you're playing a list like this, and you're just drawing so much, and you have all this influence, the chances of you beating the level 3 deck to the punch and actually killing them and maybe Regal Inquisitioning them before they kill you, I really like this approach. They're taking a lot of risk though, because they're not actually incorporating aspects such as nullifying Lantern into their main board. They might just get run over by Peppered Chef, Suzaku shenanigans. But you know what? I really respect this because this is very tacked against a level 3 meta. If Noel's list were the flexible, I have a battle plan against any matchup kind of deck list, and if DennisYao's list was more, I'm going to draw, and I'm going to beat the level 3 decks by being faster with more influence than them, then the next 3 deck lists kind of are in between, and they all have their own deck building choices, but they're kind of a little bit more solidified within the same realm. This is kind of where my personal deck is right now, and this is kind of where I feel like Luxem Zander is going to stabilize and take off in the near future. So let's take a look at these next 3 lists. These lists are now coming in on August 16th at events with over 100 individuals each. We have Otoro here at 502 record. We have ZDivX at 611 record. We also have Jace the Grey here at 520 for the DTR Online Regional. And you can see that all of their material deck is basically solidified. They're almost the exact same material deck except for these 2 changes. So Jace the Grey here is kind of finding the middle ground between Noel and DennisYao's list. They are adding a Luxeros map for that consistency and making sure they can always find a win con no matter what, as long as they can protect the Luxeros map. They're also having that draw power Portentous Tengu that allows them to take multiple off turns without really losing the opportunity to continue drawing. ZFX is not running the Luxeros map, but they are keeping the Portentous Tengu while keeping a Nullifying Lantern, so they're kind of in between that Noel and DennisYao kind of thinking, where, okay, I want that off turn, but I also want that tech. And lastly, Otoro here is literally the last permutation. They're running Luxeros map and Nullifying Lantern. I think you can see from all of these players that you can't go wrong with any of the cards in green, and the cards here, Nullifying Lantern, Tengu, and Map, and potentially Blinding Orb, those are all kind of what you feel are the comfortable choices for you and what you want to bring to game 1, knowing that you can potentially bring in the other ones from your sideboard for games 2 and 3. So I'm going to skim through, I've skimmed through the material deck. I want to take a look at the main deck here. Notice how everyone is now starting to run a very similar deck list. We're no longer running Scry the Skies, but we're also no longer running Evercurrent Raider, and we also have dropped Reduce to Ash completely. The main deck between Otoro here and Jace the Grey are basically the same. They do have some differences in ratios. For example, this deck list has 3 Excal versus the other 2 having 2. This one has 3 Striking Luminance versus these having 2 or 3. These 2 deck lists have 1 Thieving Cut versus this one having 2. But ultimately, we are running a very similar deck list with a couple of minor ratio adjustments. Personally, and this is actually just a subjective feeling, I really like ZFX's inclusion of Vanish from Sight. For me, my locals is just so full of allies that I love having the additional ally hate. But this also means that their Luxem ratio is a little bit lower, as we're running 2 Striking Luminance, 2 Uncover the Plot, let's see, 4 Sight, of course the 4 Light Weaver's Assault, the 4 Gleaming Cut, we're running 18, as opposed to 20 coming from Jace the Grey. So I know Bob likes to run 20 at least. I know that some individuals love to have more Luxem cards in their hands so that when they have access to Striking Luminance, it's much easier to do the math, because the way you can do the Striking Luminance math is as long as you have 8 cards to play to resolve Striking Luminance and Lightweaver's Assault, you can basically do like 10 damage plus 2x, where x is the number of Luxem cards that aren't Lightweaver's Assault, and if you have more Luxem in your hand, you can do more damage. You can almost see it as every Luxem card in your hand is like a shock, like a 2 damage card once you resolve your combo. But before I even get to that combo, I feel like I can win the game just from fogging myself and keeping myself alive and eventually hitting that end game board. So I really like 2 Vanish from Sight here, although I don't think you can go wrong with any of these ratios. I think this is probably the cookie cutter build for Luxem moving forward, and you can change the ratios that you like, you can probably change the material deck that you like, but this is probably a very strong build to be going to your next event, maybe your store championships, if you're thinking of Ascent Boston or whatnot. You can probably bring these in, although I really still like the Seraphim's ideas here of the Enchanted Vet and the Unyielding Wraithguard. I think is very unexplored and very interesting to see here. And we can actually see elements of that in Otoro's list here, where they're running 1 Unyielding Wraithguard in the side, and we're seeing some interesting sideboard options here. We're seeing Sovereign Sanctuary, and we're also seeing a couple more of Verrocan Acolytes coming into the sideboard here. I really like Verrocan Acolyte because if Diana becomes a strong contender in the meta, all of her bows basically has Spell Shroud, and you can't reduce to ash them, but if you can resolve a Verrocan Acolyte on their water bow that glimpses and then mills, like, you're in a much better position early game. You can kind of stop their engine from going. So I do like Verrocan Acolyte, even though it's a slow option. It doesn't turn off Censor right before your turn the way you want it to, but I feel like that's a very strong option overall. So personally, I like 2 Reduce to Ash and 1 Verrocan Acolyte, although I do see some players here running 3 Reduce and 1 Verrocan. I'm very, very curious to see how it turns out with more copies of Unyielding Wraithguard and Sovereign Sanctuary, because Sovereign Sanctuary actually applies to, if I recall, all units you control, meaning that if you have an Unyielding Wraithguard and a Sovereign Sanctuary out, they can't even clear your Wraithguard easily, because they actually have to deal more damage to kill your taunt unit. Your taunt unit comes back, then to deal more damage to get rid of that, and then they have to get through all of that in order to reach you, and you still have the Sovereign Sanctuary like fog to protect you. So I feel like down the line, if we're actually being pressured by ally decks, which I don't think we should, we have a very good matchup there, Unyielding Wraithguard and Sovereign Sanctuary are two lines I don't think we've thought about a lot. Art of War again being very strong here. This player choosing not to run Art of War, but maybe they're already happy having 2 Vanish from Sight in the main board. So I feel like with these lists, these 3 players are making different thoughts and decisions based on what they expect to see in their round 1. So maybe in my round 1, I feel like I'm going to see a lot of ally players, and I want to have access to 2 Vanish from Sight on top of 4 Resolute Stand. And in that case, I might just win round 1, and I have an easier round 2 and 3. I don't need Art of War to kind of carry me over the top there. But for this individual who has a 20-card Luxem package, they might say, hey, I might just not see my fogs. I might just lose round 1, in which case I do need Art of War. I do need to have the Art of War in order for me to catch up. So the takeaway I'm getting from these deck lists is you can't go wrong with green cards. You can't go wrong with the cards here that are in green. You can tweak the ratios, but ultimately, when you put your deck together, you want to have a battle plan. You want to think, what am I expecting to see? What am I expecting to do? For DennisYao, this individual is thinking, hey, I expect to see a lot of level 3, so I want Heavenly Guide. What I expect to do is I want to have a lot of float. I want to be able to level efficiently, and because I'm expecting to see hate towards that, I want to run 3 Reduced to Ash. This individual, ZDevX, says, I expect to see a lot of allies. I'm going to run Vanish from Sight in the main board along with 4 Resolute Stands. I'm heavier on my Fog, so I have a much better matchup there. And because of that, it opens up my sideboard to be a little bit more flexible against everything else. They run a Fire Resonance Bauble when no one else is doing so, because they can say, hey, against the other WoW decks, I now have an additional option. I can have another piece of draw. Everyone's running some level of Regal Inquisition. Everyone's running some level of Crystallized Destiny. I think those are just amazing sideboard cards you can't really go wrong with. But what I really like here as well is the Quicksilver Grail, because they are saying very early on in the meta, I have the option of going Nullifying Lantern tucked underneath the Quicksilver Grail to completely ding any Genbu list, to completely have an answer to like specific KFC Fire, Shenanigan, Kindle lists. But also, I also have an option to just use the Quicksilver Grail with Safeguard Amulet, so I have an option against any Burst Asunder lists. I just think Quicksilver Grail is an amazing card overall. It might be too early in the meta to put this in right now, because we just don't know what the best deck and format is as of yet. But we want to keep that in mind. I think that eventually we'll reach a point where Quicksilver Grail is in the main of our material deck again, but we are just not there yet. And I'm really excited to just see how this list grows and evolves in the coming format. We've got a lot of new cards. I think some players are experimenting with new cards like Fleeting Guard, I believe. I really like that card. I think there's a lot of options we could do with Spectres. I saw a list running the Fire Spectre as well. There's a lot of unexplored territory here, and we don't really know which cards are going to make it in the long run for our main deck. So as of right now, I think we're in like the coolest meta ever. There's a lot of room to experiment and improve and iterate. So to all my fellow Serene Fire Luxem players, I wish you the best of luck in experimenting with your friends at locals, and I wish you the best glimpses and the best top decks in the next event. Until next time.